I'm a bigger than average guy, and I like my watches a little bit bigger than the average taste these days. I tend to like my watches to be a little bit tooly, a little bit industrial looking as well. Collect a lot of divers, stuff like that. So why is it that one of my favorite watches is an early 1970s manual wind dress watch that is as delicate as a newborn babe, has no indices, no markers, no second hand, no minute track? Let's get into that. Yeah, so as I said, in general, I like my watches a little bit bigger. This one's really small. I like my watches kind of tooly and dress and sort of industrial looking. This one is super dress oriented, as I said in the introduction. No second hands, no markers at all, no indices at all, no minute track. This is as dress watch as a dress watch can get, and I absolutely love it. So why is it in my collection? There's really three reasons. I'd sum it up as curatorial, aesthetic, and philosophical. Let's start with the curatorial. If you haven't seen this channel before, you'll know that I love to collect vintage Alpina watches. Why? Alpina is a brand that I connect with. I like its history, I like its values, I like what it tries to achieve, I like its watches. It's taken the odd punch but got up off the canvas. All of that is something I kind of like to associate with my story. On top of that, they have a deep and interesting and affordable catalogue of vintage pieces that you can pick up from around the world, and so you can create this really interesting collection showing the history of a brand, and a brand I connect with. This watch fits into that collection and fills a gap that no other watch does. Being so dressy, being so 70s, it just creates and then fills a spot in that collection. It really does show a very specific part of the Alpina history. And for that reason, this watch has a place in my collection. The second is aesthetic. It's just such a pretty little thing. Now, if you get up close to the case, you'll probably argue that with me, and you would be right to do so. This is not a watch that comes from Alpina's glory years. Clearly, they were cutting costs here, and those costs were cut from the case. You can already begin to see that this case is clearly base metal underneath, and there's some bubbling going on under the plating. That is terribly unfortunate, and it absolutely detracts from the watch. Thankfully, the case is really small, and you don't really notice it that much. Really, this watch is dominated by the dial, and this watch is perfect. There's a peerless, very gently textured, finished kind of silvery white with unusually, given the costs that have been cut elsewhere, unusually well polished cut and quite substantial hands. So as I said, the case on this watch isn't great, but if you can choose to look past that and concentrate on the dial that really does dominate the look, this is a really pretty little watch, and that's another reason why I'd like to have it. Okay, so that's the curatorial and the aesthetic out of the way, but what about this philosophical reason? At the very moment that I saw this watch come available, I was actually wrestling with the idea of what is a watch and what is the purpose of a watch. And I was coming to the realization that those are different things. The ability to tell the time was absolutely a defining characteristic of a watch. It makes a watch, but in the 21st century, a mechanical watch's purpose is not to tell the time. Its purpose is to be a piece of jewelry. It's to represent an aesthetic. It is to make us feel better about ourselves, to hang a memory off, to record an event. It's to do a million and one other things. But it's not to be a tool that helps us turn up on time. There's lots of other ways of doing that today. And just at the moment that I was having that thought and I was thinking about what does that mean in terms of what I would want for a watch, I saw this pretty little thing that was really attractive, that fit into my collection and didn't in any way capture any of that tooliness, that functionality, which until then I'd always kind of relied upon to justify the manliness of collecting watches. This watch really threw down a challenge to that idea and really embodied it, made it real, made it manifest in front of me that here was a watch that really captured everything I was talking about. Yes, it met the defining characteristic of a watch. It tells the time. But its real purpose, that it wears out there open for everyone to see, is simply to be a piece of jewelry, is to simply look pretty. And I love the watch for that its purpose is nothing more than to look pretty. The last thing I'll say before I go on is a real spin on that last idea about the philosophy, which is this watch has within it a delicious irony. Because everything I just said about that it's primarily a piece of jewelry is absolutely true. And yet despite the fact it has no second hands, despite the fact that it doesn't have a minute track, it has no markers, and that at best telling the time on this is approximate, it runs at plus 8 seconds a day, despite being 50 years old. I love that. I think that is just hilarious.